Hello everybody, Leifkicker here in part one of a two-part video where we are going to show you how to use these molds to cast a settler's board like this. If you are interested, I am selling these molds so that you can do this on your own. We will be selling the molds. We're going to start out at $390. We came to this number by multiplying the cost of the molds. Just the cost of the silicone is about $100 for this, my cost. It takes about 4 hours for me to put all this together, and we took that final total and multiplied that by 2.5 to come up with $390. My hope is that you will take these molds, make your own castings, and from those castings make your own molds. We'll go over that later in the video, and take your castings also and make a board like this that you can sell on your own. I sell settlers boards every week. I definitely cannot keep up with demand, especially worldwide. I've shipped everywhere, all over the globe, and if you're in Germany or Australia, etc., it would be a lot cheaper if you could just make it on your side, make the board there, and sell it to your local community. If you don't want to mess with the casting, the second part of this series, we're going to take a set like this, and we're going to show you how to take the set and paint that up. A set for 4 players, as you see here, is going to be $265. A set for 6 players, which will be more than this, will be $310. If you're buying these silicone molds, you're going to get 6 baseboards, like so. You'll have 6 different border pieces. You'll have a dock piece, and you'll have one for each resource. And let's show you what a painted set looks like. So here we have a painted example. The tiles look just like this before I painted it, and there's going to be so many different ways that you can paint these up. I'm really curious to see what all of you can come up with, and I know that the community is as well too. We all love to see different ways that settlers boards can be made. When I do the casting for this video, I show you just using a Model Pro Slow, but there are different types of resin. For example, this is just a clear epoxy, so you could do the water in a clear if you wanted and come up with some really interesting effects. And before we get to casting, I want to mention, for those of you who are going to buy the mold, you've got to have the mold, you've got to have the resin, but you do also need some other tools. You're going to need some type of sander to sand these down. If you are buying just the painted set, we're going to do all that work for you, so it'll be sanded down and ready to paint. But if it's not sanded down, you're going to have this lip. So you'll need some type of belt sander, and I also recommend some type of edging machine, maybe a table saw, or I have a belt sander that has a little disc sander on the side. So just something to keep in mind. And a small rotary tool is also pretty handy. All right, let's get to casting. We're all set up for casting, but before I get to pouring anything, I thought I'd cover a few things. First, this is the silicone I used is from Specialty Resin. It's a tin-cured silicone, and this mold will last about 25 to 30 castings, so you should be able to make about 4 to 5 complete 6-player seafarers or settler sets. And I would recommend, if you do go the route of casting your own set, to save your first best pieces that you cast so that you can make your own mold later and set up something like this, and you can make some type of production mold. Between castings, you're going to want to use some type of mold release to get the most life out of it. And if these are going to sit on the shelf for a while, you'd want to put some type of silicone thinning agent on it to protect it from oxidization. The oxygen is going to, over time, deteriorate the mold, and these are only going to last on the shelf a little over a year. We also use Specialty Resin for our casting resin, and we're going to be using a Model Pro Slow. Specialty Resin is affordable prices. They have great customer service and a great product. I cannot recommend enough. I will throw a link to their website in the description below. I have pre-mixed a bunch of colors that we're going to need to make these castings, and Specialty Resin also sells all the pigments you need. So there's that. And I like to pre-mix for like the base. You're going to need 30 of these, so you're going to want enough of the same colored base for all 30, and I recommend getting a jug. I'm using just an old almond milk jug, mixed all my brown up in there, so I have enough brown to last throughout. If you're new to casting, water is horrible, so you do not want to get in using any type of stir stick. I don't like using these wooden sticks because the wood can wick in moisture out of the air. So I recommend using a plastic stir stick. And we are going to do some individual color pour, so having some pipettes is handy. I have already pre-coated this with the mold release. And I like to use a digital scale. It tells me what number we're at right out the gate. And we're going to start with white first, so we can get the sheep all done. You need to mix about an ounce at a time usually, but you're not going to need that much white, so you can get away with going a little less. You just want to make sure your numbers are really accurate. And I found that with specialty resin, you need to go a little bit over on the hardener side. I usually go almost 10% over. I like to cast in these different colors. That way, if the paint gets rubbed off, it's going to rub off into the color that the piece should be. So if we're scraping the paint off the back of these sheep, it's still going to be white. And by using the Model Pro Slow, you've got plenty of time to get around to all your pieces. Be sure to get the air out and get them all filled up before it starts to harden. You can go with a, they have a 12-minute work time as well if you need a little bit more time. I find that just takes way too long to cure. And the 6-minute stuff works out really great for me. If you wanted to get real fancy, you could go through and fill all these numbers up too. That just takes way too much time for me. I think it's just quicker to paint the numbers. I like to jab down in the head of the sheep. Make sure there's no air down in there. You don't want any bubbles because then you'll have to fix that after. I like to keep some Q-tips handy just in case you make a little spill. You can clean that area up. Next color we're going to do is green, so we can fill in the trees here on the sheep and also fill in the forest itself. Tar that out. I've pre-weighed all my pieces, so I know pretty much exactly how much we need for most of these. For the trees, it's about 1.5 ounces, but we're going to go a little extra so we can fill in the trees for the sheep. And that's almost 0.9, so we're just going to tar out and put in 0.9. When I make the molds, I am making this on a level surface. So if you're pouring on a level surface, then you shouldn't have any issue. That doesn't mean I got them perfect. Sometimes they might be off just a little bit. So if that's the case, it is handy to have a board or something that you could set these on, and then you can adjust the level if you need to. Or if you're working on a not level surface, you can use these little wooden sticks to try to level it out. I think we're going to be pretty good here. The trees, I like to tap a little bit. There's a bit of a curve that the air bubble needs to work itself around. I'm going to try to tap those bubbles out. We still had some use left on this pipette that I just used for the sheep, so we're going to fill up this tree. That way, again, if there's any rubbing on these tiles later, it's going to rub through to a color that is more appealing than just a flat gray or something. And all this resin is going to bond to itself. Each one of these should bond really nicely. I'm going to use the same stir stick, wipe it off. That way the green doesn't change my yellow any. You can see the sheep are starting to gel up. We'll want to get some brown in there soon. We're pouring in the middle and letting the resin push any air bubbles out. You don't want to dump too fast. You want to give that air time to escape. Now you don't have to on this next part, but you can fill each one of these up, the resources, with their corresponding color. I'll try to get the green in on this wheat. Use a pipette if you need. We want to make a lighter green than we need than the trees. So I like to mix, and we're going to need about 1 ounce. So we're going to do about 0.25 of yellow. We'll round that up to 0.5. We want the sheep green to be different than the forest green. And then we can tar it out, or if you're able to do the math in your head, we go to just a little over 1 ounce. So with the yellow in this green should be lighter than the trees. I'm gonna go ahead and pour these two. And while I'm pouring that, let's do the desert. Desert takes about 1 ounce, but we're gonna go ahead and do about 1.5 ounces total. That way we can get some of those docks going. Clean off the stir stick I've been using and get going. I keep a tool that has a bit of a hook on it so I can work. There's an edge on these docks, and it helps if you have a tool to work around the edge to pull out any air bubbles. And you can also trace those numbers to try to knock any air bubbles out too. You want to be careful when you're doing this not to poke into those sheep. And we want to bring those right to level. Not doing that way. There we go. And I like to fill in these areas where the border is with brown too. You don't want to go too much so you're not getting it to spill into the water. But there's enough lip there where you can make a nice little level area of brown. That'll help a lot when it comes to painting here in a bit. And also, in case you have some wear and tear, these are going to last a really long time. These will be heirloom pieces if you do it right. This set will be in your family for generations, and as it gets played on, it's going to have some dings, and it'll help if that color underneath matches. So while that's setting up, we can come over here and either do the red for the brick or the gray for the ore. Once the cup's hardened, you can reuse if you want to save and just reuse in the cup a different color. You want to be sure it's hardened before you do that though. So the ore wants 2 ounces. If you are going to go the mold route, I will be happy to supply you with all the measurements that I have and some of the mixing ratios that we use, so you can kind of color match what we have going on if you want, rather than guessing once you get there. So I need about 2.1 total ounces. We're going to do the same thing that we did on the wheat. I'm going to do a pipette for this one. Let's fill in that stone. Top that off. There we go. You can see I got a little spot right there. Spilled some brown. Let's clean that up before we add anything else to this. There we go. The brick is another 1.5 ounces, so we're going to do 0.8. I'd rather have a little bit extra in the cup than not enough. Tar that out. Do another little bit over 0.8. Some resins you really got to be exact. If it says, mix 1 to 1 and you're off just a hair, it may not set. But I found that the specialty resin, you still got to be pretty close, but it's pretty forgiving. You don't have to be right exact on the number, like exactly 1 ounce to 1 ounce. Like I said, it does like to have a little bit more of the hardener side because it just doesn't weigh as much as the color side. To me, it seems it's about 10% off. Let's see if I can get away with using this pipette that I used for the brick, or the ore, or stone, the rock. Get this brick filled in. There we go. So we can fill in these now, and go ahead and fill in the borders around these waters. I'm not exactly sure what each one of these weighs, so I'm just going to go with an ounce. Just guess here. You also wouldn't want to mix over your molds like I'm doing, just in case you splash out. I'm kind of limited on space, so I kind of don't have an option. Normally you can pinch the cup and it just wants to funnel right out. Now that we're on camera, it's wanting to give me some fits. Another trick you can do to make sure you don't have any bubbles in your numbers is to just put a little bit in first, kind of scrape that around, and give the air a chance to escape. This is the wheat, so I want to be careful not to mash that wheat too much. Go ahead and top these off. Not quite enough. We're going to pour this area over here and maybe one of these. And before I do that, I want to see if I can negotiate any of these air bubbles that might be hiding under this lip out. And this is what we're going to do for you all who are just wanting to paint your own set. We're going to be just as meticulous when we go through and try to make you the best set we possibly can. So I know these are 2 ounces, so I'm going to mix a little bit more so I can fill in this area and top these off. And I want to get this topped up as quick as possible. Resin, when it's mixed, after one's already hardening, it can be irritating. So it won't want to. It does bind, but when half of it's already gelling and you're mixing it up, and the other half is still waiting to gel, it can make some weird little effects in the resin. Versus what I was doing with the wheat and the rock, where we're layering the resin versus mixing the resin. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go to a bigger cup on this so we don't make a spill. When you're pouring your borders, you want to start with the outside. Let the water or the resin push around the hex, and it's going to lift up any air bubbles. If you're still having troubles with air bubbles, you can put a little talcum powder. That helps to keep the bubbles from forming or sticking so bad onto the silicone. The air can, or the resin can trap the bubbles underneath. And that'll help diffuse that. I'm making a mess over here. Big old mess. If you do make a mess, acetone's a great tool to clean that up with. It does help thin out the resin, and you'll obviously want to do it while the resin's still wet and goopy. It's not going to do much once the resin's hardened. If you get it on your hands or something. Right now we're going to do the blue for the waters. Each water is about 2 ounces. Let's see if we can just do 6 ounces and knock 3 of these out. A little bit extra for the hardener. Try to use these stir sticks over and over again. The nice thing about these stir sticks is when the resin is hardened, you can just scrape it off. And these are going to last a lot longer. Wooden stir sticks, pretty much one and done. And again, they can hold water, and water and resin do not mix. If your resin is all bubbly, you've got water in it. And just having the resin sit out and open, it's going to pull water out of the air. See, that's why we don't mix over your casting. You're making a mess. A little brown right there, gonna clean it up. I do like to pour the second layer, if I'm doing layers like I have going on here where there's the brown for the beach border. I do like to pour more when it's still liquidy like this. At this point it's really thick molasses, and they're going to bond really well together. Versus when it's already hardened like this, it's still going to stick, but the bond is better when it's like this over here. So we need about 5 more ounces. I'm just guessing from having cast hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these sets. I have been making settlers boards for over 10 years now. And they've come a long way. So earlier, I was talking about how you might have one that's not quite level, and here's a good example. You can see that it's running off the side here. So we're going to see if we can fix that. A little shim. And I did not mix enough green in my green for my trees. It's a little light, so my sheep did not turn out quite the right color that I like normally. We can fix that in the next pour. And as you pour your sets, you're going to get a feel for it. All right, I think we're good. So now we need to let this set. It's going to need to set at least an hour before we pull them out. And when they're, I'm going to clean up a little bit, and we'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like when you pull it. All right, let's crack these open and see what we got. Looking pretty good. Not seeing any bubbles. Desert. Next, we're going to have to sand all of these down. We got to make enough for a full board. We'll need to do 6 more castings of some of these if we want a full board. See how well that bonded together? Now the first 20 or so castings should come out pretty smooth, and then you'll start feeling it get pretty grabby. Here's the sheep. Came out pretty good. I'm not seeing any big bubbles, which is what we want. It'll make finishing this up a lot easier. So these turned out pretty good too. There are some bubbles in the number. I'll show you how to patch that with some epoxy clay. With the numbers, the docks, you're going to be able to make way more of these than you will the rest of the set, because you only need one set of numbers per set of settlers. So you can make 25, 30 of these, and you can take the best of the best if you don't want to worry about trying to fix these little bubbles. But they won't take much to fix. It's a pretty simple fix, and we're going to be painting over all that anyway. All right, I'm going to get all this cleaned up and cast up the rest that we need for the set. We'll do that off camera, so you don't have to watch me cast, the 6 more times. And we'll look at the final castings and go from there. I've got everything cast up. It took me about 5 hours to make everything, about 45 minutes a run. And now we have to trim and sand down all the pieces so they fit. When you're casting, like, you're going to have some overfill, for example, right here. And we want all this to be level so the board sits level. So I have to sand all these down. I'll show you a couple of different ways you can sand these down and some tools that you might want to pick up to make this a lot easier. And then we'll need to make sure each side is nice and square. And same with all the resources. We need to make sure this hex is a good even hex so that when we get done painting, it'll snap in real nice. So the main tool you're probably going to need is some type of combination sander like this with a disc sander on the side and a belt sander. If you're in America, we have Harbor Freights just about everywhere, and you can get something like this for less than $100. This is a more industrial version. This is a Grizzly tool, and a bit more expensive. It does the job, and we'll show you some examples of sanding. So the idea is to get it nice and sanded down, nice and flat. We can trim off these if there's any burrs later, but we just want a nice flat surface so we can glue these into the hex. If you don't have a belt sander, you could probably get away with just using a little palm sander like this. I got this one viced down. I'm not going to run it and show you, but same concept. Run the palm sander, you can sand your tiles down here. If you can afford it, I highly recommend some type of thickness planer like this little model machine here. And I'll show you how it works and why it's so important. You're going to want all of your base hexes to be the same thickness. You can definitely hand sand that down. It's tricky, but if you have a thickness planer like this, you can just zip these through and it's going to make this the right level for you. I have mine all set up, so if you're buying the unpainted set, we're going to sand all these down for you. You won't have to worry about that. We will keep running these through until they're all the same thickness, and you'll have a nice flat level board. For the waters, you won't be able to send the waters through something like that, so you'll just have to hand sand these down, and that's where I recommend something like a belt sander. If you don't have any way to do some type of sander, we have another option. Using a metal sheet like this with a piece of sandpaper held down with some magnets can be pretty useful if you just don't have access to machinery. You'll just have to hand sand each one of these down. It's going to take a lot longer, but it will get the job done. I would definitely recommend picking up a belt sander over doing it like this. The sander does a pretty good job for that little circular disc to trim the sides down, but I prefer to use something like this 4-inch mini table saw to really dial in the correct width. And if you are buying this ready to paint, we're going to sand these down flat. We're going to make sure everything's the same thickness, so each of the hexes are the same size. And one of the dilemmas for those of you who are going to be casting yourself, if this heats up, when it's hot, it expands. So even if it just expands just a hair, just say 0.5 millimeter all the way around, your third, fourth, fifth casting are going to be just a hair bigger than your first. So something like this can really help to trim everything down to be the correct size. As you can see, it didn't take a whole lot, but just enough that it's worth sending to a saw like this, and these are now all going to be the same size next. So the last tool that I would recommend you having, it's a great tool to add to any crafter's shop, is some type of rotary tool. And this one here is pretty inexpensive. You can pick this up for about $65 off eBay. It's just a little dental tool. It's not very loud. The handpiece is really light, and as you're casting, you are going to have some bubbles. It's really hard not to have any bubbles. They'll come up, and you have a few choices. You can either fill them, leave it as is and just ignore it, or you can sculpt them out. I prefer to try to knock them out. That way I don't have to go through and try to fill it. And there are so many different rotary bits that will help you. And to give you an example, you can see this little bubble right here on the tree. I'm just going to use this little ball bit. I'm just going to try to sculpt that right out. If you're buying a set that's ready to paint, we are going to go through and try to knock out as many of the bubbles as we can. We are definitely not going to find them all. Some are going to sneak through, so you might want to have one of these too if you want to really clean it up. You can also use a little blade or something to cut those out, or again, filling. And let me show you another bit. So this was a little ball bit. You can use something like this little, it's kind of got a square edge on it. We've got a bubble right there. I'll just take this bit, kind of follow the same line that's there. Try to blend that in so it just looks like it's part of the natural piece. When the next video we're going to do painting, and in the painting video I will show you some other tips on how to fill in bubbles if you do have that. Here we have the set all sanded down and ready to paint. This is what a full 6-player set would look like. Thank you all for staying with me till the end. If you like this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and a share if you can. It really helps the channel out a lot. As always, links in the description below, and be sure to check out the next video where I show you how to paint this. Thanks for watching.